anointing fall on us.
Anointing fall on us. Anointing fall on us. Let the power of the Holy Spirit fall on us. Anointing fall on us.
Thank you. Well, thank you. And even if you don't have questions tonight and questions arise later, you can still make contact with me and ask them. And I will try my best to answer your questions. I just wanted, if I could get my text first. Last week we explored marriage as sacrament. And I asked you and invited you to jump out of the box a little. Because traditionally, as I said, I think in many ways we have explored sacraments really, or at least as how we understood it, as things we get. And I really think that's a dead end. Because once you get the thing, it's done. And I think if we look at how we have treated the sacraments, that's exactly how we have, right? We come, we get it, and we gone. Finish. And I invited us to explore sacraments as relationship, as an encounter with the living God who invites us into relationship with Him and His church. And so we started to look at, and I dealt with marriage last week as sacrament, as sacrament. An encounter with the living God that invites us into relationship with Him and the church. The sacrament of marriage is then a vocation, a way of life that a Christian man and a Christian woman commit themselves to live. By so doing, the couple become the sacrament. Their relationship of love, of forgiveness, of compassion, of mercy, become the place where they each encounter God or God's presence and are together. Their relationship become the place where their children encounter God, their family, and of course, the bigger family of the church. It is in their relationship of love that we encounter the presence of our living God. They are the sacrament of marriage. It is not just something they got on their wedding day, the thing. But it is what they live daily in their call to married relationship. Their decision to live this lifestyle means that they have obligations and responsibilities, not just to each other, not just to their children or immediate family, but the bigger family of the church. So marriage as sacrament is not a private thing between the couple. It's more. They have responsibility. I hope that this has been some help, especially to couples thinking about marriage, preparing for marriage, couples who are already married and want to renew themselves and their relationship. I feel very passionate about it myself, that I think their vocation, their call to this way of life is really vital to the life of our church and to our society. Now, this week I want to turn my attention to the other side, the flip side. I want to start out by saying that our faith community's understanding of marriage is steeped in 2,000 years of theological reflection and lived experience. We ain't just come. It is grounded in scripture, both Old and New Testament. It has developed over centuries through a broadening of horizons and bridging of expanses. The writings on marriage can literally fill libraries. So let us understand what we are dealing with. Our theology of marriage is like a coin. On one side, there is an exposition of what marriage is. And I attempted to look a little bit at that last week. And if you flip the coin over, if you have a coin, it has two sides. Right? On the other side, the converse is established. What marriage is not. Tonight, I would like to spend the limited time we have and explore what marriage is not. But I will do this in the light of what marriage is. The church's law, the code of canon law, if ever you saw a book looking like this, there are different editions and different translations, so it might look differently. But the code of canon law, which is the church's law, reflect the teaching of the church. And so the canons on marriage will ultimately reflect in juridical language the theology of the church on marriage. So you have the teaching of the church on marriage, which is expressed in its theology. That language, theological language, which is the teaching of the church, now must be expressed in juridical language, language of law. And so the code of canon law will reflect that teaching, but in juridical language. Canons 1055 to 1062 set the stage for our exploration. These canons define in legal categories what marriage is, though some would say that marriage is a contract between a man and a woman. It is much more, as we saw last week. It is a covenant relationship between a man and a woman that is ordered to their good and the procreation and education of children. When a baptized man and a baptized woman, I'm underlining baptized there, therefore Christian man and Christian woman, marry, it is a sacrament. And we're going to need to understand that, because there's a little confusion sometimes take place. Everybody feels that every marriage is a sacrament. No. Right. Only marriage between two baptized persons is a sacrament. A sacramental marriage, a very technical term, is the marriage between two persons, man and a woman, who are baptized Christian. Now you're going to have to understand what baptized Christian is. Yes? So, an Anglican marries a Catholic in the Catholic Church. Sacramental? Yes? A Catholic marries a Pentecostal in the Catholic Church. Not sure. I see I see a little confusion, and that's the point I want to make. At the moment, for us Catholics, a baptized person is one who has been baptized in the mainline Christian churches. Why? It's a simple thing. Those churches, so Anglicans, Methodists, Lutherans, all the branches of Methodists, these mainline Christian churches have been able to work out what their theology, what their teaching is concerning baptism, and they also have the liturgy, how they celebrate it. And once that is in keeping with our own teaching of baptism and understanding of baptism, we accept their baptism as a valid baptism. You with me, or you're more confused? Now, the difficulty we have with some churches who might be referred to as Christian is that they don't have that clear understanding of their teaching. There's, like, for example, the Pentecostal church. There's no one Pentecostal church, right, as I understand it. There are many different churches who are under that heading of Pentecostal. So if this particular church, who might be of Pentecostal flavor or whatever you want to call it, but it's as separate as the one down the street. There's no one, and therefore their theology as well as their celebration is not very clearly defined. You will find in some churches, for example, who say they are Christian, that they will speak of baptism as offering up. What that offering up is, we are not sure. For us, for example, the celebration of baptism must be very clear, using the Trinitarian formula. I baptize you in the name of the Father and of the Son and of the Holy Spirit. Using water, not milk or oil or any other liquid. So it's very clear. So the definition of what baptism is, what we understand and hold baptism to mean, that's what will in fact inform us concerning the validity of baptism. At the moment as we stand, those baptisms within the mainline Christian churches, we in the Catholic Church accept as valid. That's why if you were baptized in the Anglican Church or the Lutheran Church, for example, and you come over and want to become Catholic, you're not baptized. You are received into full communion. Because the baptism that was celebrated there, we recognize as a valid baptism. Okay? So when we speak of true baptized Christians, we are speaking not just simply those who were baptized in the Catholic Church, but also others who may have been baptized in the mainline Christian churches, where we accept their baptism as a valid baptism. You with me? So marriage between two such persons, a man and a woman who have been baptized validly, that marriage is sacramental. So let's probably go to the code and read the actual text of that canon. It reads, "The marriage covenant by which a man and a woman," clearly noted, "establish between themselves a partnership of their whole life, and which of its own very nature is ordered to the well-being of the spouses and to the procreation and upbringing of children, has between the baptized been raised by Christ the Lord to the dignity of a sacrament." Now, Canon 1056, the canon following that one says, "The essential properties of marriage are unity and indissolubility. In Christian marriage between two baptized persons, therefore sacramental marriage, they acquire a distinctive firmness by reason of the sacrament."
Now, before I go on with this, because I dealt with the sacrament marriage as the sacramental marriage, yes, between two baptized. So a Catholic gets married to a Hindu in the Catholic Church. What happened? It's not a sacrament, so what kind of marriage? Eh? They're not marriage. No, no, no. It is a natural law marriage and very valid unless proven otherwise. I'm going to come back. Let me go further. Two Hindus get married, celebrating their marriage through the Hindu rite. Is it a valid marriage or not? Huh? Not sacramental. We are clear about that. So because it's not two Christians. But is it valid? Yes. It's a natural law marriage. Now, in order to understand this, I think we have to understand that marriage itself is governed not just simply by the code of canon law. You're getting puzzling. Marriage as a reality, in other words, is not just simply Catholic marriage or Christian marriage, but marriage is even more than that. And the church's teaching is very clear about this, that marriage, the author of marriage is God, who has endowed marriage with its own laws. So marriage is governed first by divine law and natural law. First. Secondly, marriage is also governed by civil law. Civil law. Civil law, what I'm referring to here, is the laws of a state. So, for example, we live in this country, the state of Trinidad and Tobago. Trinidad and Tobago as a state, as a country, has its own laws that govern marriage of its citizens. You with me? So, a citizen or citizens of Trinidad and Tobago must follow the civil laws that govern marriage for them. So you have you have God's law, divine law, natural law, you have the state's law, and then you have canon law. You with me? All right. Keep that in mind. So we think, and that's why I was asking you just now, two Hindus get married, two Muslims get married, two nobody who are not baptized anyway, they're not Christian, but maybe don't practice any religion at all, they get married. Those marriages are seen, recognized by us Catholics as valid marriage because they follow the natural law. And they're referred to as natural law marriages. Now, it's important because you see where this ties up? Let me give you a little scenario quickly. I'm moving on from a text. If a Catholic marries, no, let me go with two Hindus. Two Hindus marry following the Hindu tradition and religious rites. Right? That marriage breaks down. Those two persons who got married there eventually meets a nice Catholic, fall in love, and decide to get married. So they come to Father Mike and say, Father Mike, we want to get married. Father Mike said no. Right? You understand? The first thing is that we have to determine, are they free to marry? The priest in his first interview with the couple will have to determine that. In this case, if the Hindu who was married previously in a Hindu ceremony and his wife is not dead, he's not free. Therefore, he can't get married to the Catholic in the Catholic Church, because his first marriage is a valid marriage unless it's proven otherwise, and is still standing. We're going to come back to that just now. So it has ramifications for you to understand the various scenarios concerning marriage. Always remember, Catholics are the only ones that are required to follow canon law concerning their marriage, other than the civil laws and divine law. So Hindus or Muslims or any other person wanting to get married who they're not Catholic, they're not required to follow canon law. You with me? Okay. Important to understand that. So let me go back to my text. All right. So canons 1055 to 1062 set the stage for our exploration tonight. These canons define in legal categories what marriage is. Though some would say that marriage is a contract between a man and a woman, it is much more, as we saw last week. It is a covenant relationship between a man and a woman that is ordered to their good and the procreation and education of children. When a baptized man and a baptized woman marry, it is a sacrament. That's a sacramental marriage. The other marriages between a baptized person and a non-baptized person, between a baptized person or two non-baptized persons, those marriages are valid natural law marriages. Now, the actual words that the church's teaching would use, both in the Catechism of the Catholic Church, which quotes, in fact, the teaching from Vatican II, Gaudium et Spes, it speaks of the intimate community of life and love, which constitutes the married state, has been established by the Creator and endowed by Him with its own proper laws. That's the divine law. God Himself is the author of marriage. And you'll see that in the Catechism of the Catholic Church, 1063. Now this canon, 1055, together with the one that follows, 1056, which states, and I quoted it already, that, just to remind ourselves of it, it says, the essential properties of marriage are unity and indissolubility. In Christian marriage, they acquire a distinctive firmness by reason of the sacrament. So those two canons, 1055 and 1056, establishes some things here. First, that marriage is a covenant. Secondly, that the essential properties of this covenant relationship are unity and indissolubility. Unity meaning exclusivity. One man, one woman. No deputy essential. Sorry. I'm sorry. We jump up at it and we laugh about it and we clap at it, but it's wrong. Unity speaks of one man committing himself to this one woman in a faithful relationship. That must reflect, that's why it's going to be sacrament, must reflect the faithfulness of our God in His relationship with us. So, unity. And then indissolubility, meaning lifelong commitment, not just 5 years or for as long as you look young and beautiful, or a famous one that I get very often in my work, that when problems come along, I reserve the right to divorce you. No. What you say on your wedding day? In good times and in bad, in sickness and in health, until death do us part. That is indissolubility. That is covenant. Covenant. And a little side to that, you see, I think where that has become really questionable in our society today is because our couples are not building friendship. I'm sorry to say it. Young man meet young woman. It feel good, tingly. You know? Very quickly they move and change that relationship from friendship into physical. It becomes a sexual relationship, and as I often say, sex is getting away. Because when you change that, the scenario, the whole dynamic changes for the relationship. They stop building friendship and it becomes a physical relationship. And that's to their downfall. You cannot sustain marriage relationship if you don't build friendship. Very, very vital and important for us to look at when we speak of preparation. Now, how then does a marriage come about? How does a marriage come about? Canon 1057 tells us that a marriage is brought into being by the lawfully manifested consent of persons who are legally capable. So the law declares that marriage is brought about through three things. First, it is brought about by the consent of the two persons. The consent of the parties. And the parties here are the bride and groom. And the code says very clearly, nobody can supply that consent for them. Those two persons have to freely give their consent to be married, to give themselves to each other, and in that giving of consent to give themselves to each other, that self-donation, that constitutes the state of marriage. So, now, there was a big debate about this, what makes marriage way back, right? And is it the consent of the parties? You're going to have a little thing, and you'll probably hear it in the Latin term, ratum et consummatum. Marriage is brought about, yes, when that consent is given, right? You ratify it. That's the day of your wedding. When you stand up and say, I take, to the two. But then that consent, which is freely given at that moment, now has to be consummated in an act of sexual intercourse. Right? And that, the two things makes the marriage. In other words, if a marriage is only ratified, consent exchange, but not consummated, we can end it. Because it's not yet a true marriage. Ratum non et consummatum. Right? And usually in such cases we have to send to Rome. The Holy Father is the only one that allows for the ending of such a marriage. Ratum non consummatum. All right, so consent. The second ingredient that is needed to bring about marriage, this consent must be legitimately manifested. And the third thing by those, therefore the bride and the groom, qualified according to the law. So the two persons who are standing up there to give their consent must be by law qualified to do so. All right? Oh, I'm getting a little... So let's take those three things, three elements. So if consent was defective, marriage was not brought about. You with me? If the consent was not legitimately manifested, therefore the way it was manifested was not legal, marriage was not brought about. And thirdly, if one or both of the parties, the bride or the groom, or together, both of them, were not qualified according to law, then marriage was not brought about. You with me? So it's three ways in which the marriage can be declared invalid. Yes? So let's look at them. We leave the consent for last because it's the most involved one. Let's look first at when the consent was not legitimately manifested. This is referred to the form, F-O-R-M, form of marriage, of the celebration of marriage. And canons 1108 to 1123 addresses this issue. So for example, Canon 1108 says, only those marriages are valid which are contracted in the presence of the local ordinary. Who is he? In our case, the archbishop is the local ordinary. Right? Or parish priest, or the priest or deacon delegated by either of them. Who, so it's the archbishop, the parish priest, or a priest or deacon delegated by them, who in the presence of two witnesses assists in accordance with the rules set out in the following canons. Only that person being present asks the contracting parties to manifest their consent, and in the name of the church receives it, is understood to assist at the marriage. So for a valid marriage to take place, that consent has to be manifested before either the bishop, the parish priest, or a priest and deacon delegated by them. And that is the person who we used to say all along, I remember I challenged you last week, the father who marry us. No, father ain't marrying nobody. Right? But father, on behalf of the church, is asking the couple to manifest their consent, and on behalf of the church receives that consent. You with me? So there are certain rules, in other words, that govern the way the marriage must be celebrated. Right? The way the marriage must be celebrated. Right? And of course, the liturgical books of also will have the liturgy of the celebration of marriage, which we confuse with Mass. It's not Mass. Right? It's not Mass. Right? There's sometimes when you speak of a nuptial wedding, where Mass, it is within the Mass, but marriage itself can be celebrated outside of Mass. It don't have to be in a Mass. And it's something that maybe we need to start looking at seriously, because you're putting a lot of pressure on your priests when you demand that you must have Mass at your wedding. And funerals too. I'm putting in something on the side here for the poor priests, right? They're overworked. No, you could imagine most of the marriages are celebrated on Saturday. Huh? Well, the Archbishop has decreed now in the Archdiocese that you don't get Mass with your wedding after midday. So many of them probably going to be asking for Saturday morning. The poor priest got to celebrate Mass. In some parishes, he has a parish Mass on Saturday morning. Then he got to do a wedding Mass. And then he got to go back and celebrate a Saturday evening Mass of the Sunday. And then he has the Sunday Masses. Come on. Come on. Very often, the attendees of the wedding, the Mass mean nothing to them, you know. The Lord be with you and with yourself. No, true. It's time we start looking at it seriously. The celebration of marriage is done beautifully within the liturgy of marriage. So I'm giving you a little pitch on that one, but watch out. How I reach there? I don't know. All right. So, but the form of marriage is dictated by the law. And that is what will determine if it is legitimately manifested or not. You with me? Right? So, for example, a Catholic, a nice Catholic couple, both of them are Catholic, is because they want to go for the preparation. Sometimes, I know. So they decide, they don't worry with that. They gone down the road and they make the arrangements and get married in the registry, the registrar's office. You with me? Valid? Don't confuse yourself. I said two Catholics, huh? Therefore, they're required not only to follow the civil laws and natural law, but canon law. The marriage is invalid. Because they are required to celebrate their marriage, manifesting their consent in a particular way. And that was not followed. Now, this is so important, especially our viewers out there. I had a case where a woman came after 30 years of marriage, and she said, you know, Father, I never knew that my marriage was invalid. She was Catholic, the husband was not. She went and celebrated her marriage in his church without permission. Because the law says, no, you have to follow the form of marriage for Catholics. But that law can be relaxed with what is called a dispensation. You have to apply for a dispensation from canonical form in order to have your marriage celebrated outside of that format. And that wasn't done. So the poor woman, she said, I never knew my marriage. I thought my marriage was a good marriage all the time. And somebody came and whispered to me the other day, your marriage invalid. And so she rushed down to my office. Right? So important. Right? Important. So canonical form, you will hear that term being expressed, has to do with, has the consent been legitimately manifested? Right? You with me? Now, if that consent was not legitimately manifested, the scenario I give you just now, two Catholics went and got married in the registrar's office. The state, yes, recognizes that marriage as a valid marriage, but the church doesn't. They will need to go to their parish priest and to be able to speak with their parish priest, because that marriage, which is invalid at the moment, can now be made valid if they will follow the form of marriage prescribed for Catholics. So they have to speak with their parish priest, who will bring them in. He has some paperwork and so to do, and then the marriage, which is not a legal marriage now, we refer to it as convalidation. They make valid that which is not valid. And it's really just falling through with the actual rite of marriage prescribed for Catholics. And it can be done very quietly, to make that marriage a valid marriage. You with me? All right. Now, the second one that we are looking at, which is the last of the three pieces that I mentioned, if one or both parties manifesting consent are not qualified by law to do so. The law prohibits certain persons from entering marriage. You didn't know that? Huh? Ah, she got it, yes. That's one case. But I thought the obvious one would jump out at me. Age. Age. Age is a factor. So there's some people who are not allowed, they're not free, if you want to use that, they are not legally qualified to enter into marriage. And Canons 1083 to 1094 deals with this. It is what you refer to as an impediment. An impediment to marriage. So there is, an impediment is like a block. So this is blocking this person. This person is not capable, legally capable of entering marriage. First one, Canon 1083 is age. Second one, impotence. A lot of people don't know that. Not sterility. Not if two persons can't have children, but impotence. Right? Impotence in both male and female, whether it's absolute or relative. Impotence does not allow the couple to be able to give themselves totally to each other in the act of sexual intercourse. Canon 1085, person who is bound by the bond of a previous marriage, what our sister said, right? So if somebody is already married, they have a civil divorce. You with me? Don't go to sleep now. So they have a civil divorce, therefore, the state of Trinidad and Tobago, using a legal instrument they call divorce, ends a marriage that they saw was a valid marriage. And they just use that instrument to end the marriage. You with me? That's the civil divorce. Now, the Catholic Church does not accept any instrument as ending a marriage. Don't get confused. Just hold with it and stay with me. There's no instrument the Catholic Church will accept as ending a marriage. Therefore, two people, the marriage breaks down for whatever the reasons. We're going to come back to that just now. One of the persons petitions the civil jurisdiction for a civil divorce. The state, using that instrument, ends the marriage for the state. So the person is no longer married, and for the state is free to enter another marriage. However, because the Catholic Church does not accept divorce, that legal instrument, as ending a marriage, the church will still see that marriage as standing, unless it is proven otherwise. And we're going to come to that just now. Right? So, if that person was married before, the marriage was seen as a valid marriage. Now, don't confuse yourself. If it was a Catholic, got married to a non-baptized person outside of the church, valid or not valid? Not valid. Not valid. That marriage breaks down. That Catholic now comes to get married in the Catholic Church. He or she is free to enter into marriage. Because the first marriage lacked canonical form. They got married outside of the church without a dispensation from canonical form. So in some instances, you might hear of somebody who got married, who was married, you know they were married, they got divorced, and then you see that person getting married in the culture. You say, well, how they could do that? They must be past a lot of money. No, they didn't pass any money. That's sometimes how our warped minds think. No. That marriage, that first marriage, was invalid. Was never valid in the church. Unless they had done a convalidation, then it would have been valid. But if they didn't do a convalidation, it was invalid. It broke down. Both persons are now free to enter into marriage in the Catholic Church. But if you had a different scenario, the one I gave you earlier, two Hindus got married. Valid natural law marriage, that marriage breaks down, they apply to the state, gets a divorce. Now that Hindu, not Catholic Hindu, still a Hindu, comes to get married in the Catholic Church with a Catholic. Still married. A valid marriage, therefore that person will have to apply to the tribunal for a declaration of nullity. I have 5 minutes more. Ooh. Hey, y'all gonna bring me back? All right. Okay, there are other impediments there too. Orders. If I go to try and get married somewhere, attempt marriage, I can't because my ordination stands in the way. And that one can't be dispensed locally. Only the Holy Father can do that. Right? It's one of those that is reserved to Rome. Can't be dispensed locally. All right? Not even in danger of death. There are others there that you could think. One of the other ones is relationship. So if you're related by blood, even the state has that in their laws. In the direct line of descent, no, can't happen. The grandfather can't marry his granddaughter. You with me? Okay. Collateral line up to the 4th degree, which is really first cousins, can't. They will need a dispensation. But no dispensation from collateral line, 2nd degree. Brother and sister cannot be given. Okay? So, and there are other relationships, like a relationship through adoption, relationship through marriage, if the two parties are related through marriage. Father married to this woman, her daughter from a previous relationship, and a son can't get that kind of thing, affinity. All right. The third one, which is the most important, I've run out of time for, is the consent. Now, for marriage to take place, as I said at the beginning, the consent must be freely given by these parties who are capable by law and so on. We looked at those two. Now, the consent is the thing that really, a defective consent that leads the tribunal into a judicial process to determine if the marriage is valid or not. In this process, in the two before, by defective form and capable impediment, the tribunal can do it through a documentary process. Through documents, the tribunal is able to prove that this person was incapable of marriage, is not lawfully, therefore the marriage was invalid, an impediment was there, or in some cases where the canonical form was not there, right? But in defective consent, it has to go through a judicial process, a court process. Now, marriage enjoys the favor of law, and as such stands unless proven otherwise. It's one of those presumptions in law. For example, a man is innocent until proven. It says innocence is upheld until evidence is so led to turn it to guilty. Same thing happens in marriage. The presumption is that the marriage, once the two persons celebrated their marriage on that day with the canonical form and everything okay, it's presumed that it's a valid marriage. Now, if a couple's marriage broke down and they apply, one of the parties can petition the tribunal for a declaration of nullity. And that declaration of nullity is a judicial process, a court process that must admit evidence, has to look and examine the evidence properly. The judge has to come to moral certainty and then pronounce that this marriage was invalid because so and so. Let me just give you a quick example. Faithfulness. A lot of people think that because parties were unfaithful in the relationship, it invalidates the marriage. No. they have to prove through that court process that the person or persons had no intention to be faithful in the marriage. You understand me? So it's not just that a party in a marriage was unfaithful, but they have to prove through that process, they have to prove through the evidence that is led that one of the parties usually had absolutely no intention of being faithful. He was at the girlfriend's house the night before the wedding. He slept with her. After the wedding, on the honeymoon, he was still carrying on. After the marriage, it continued. It's more than likely such a person had absolutely no intention of being faithful to the marriage. You with me? It is a very involved process, and that is what occupies most of my time in the tribunal in terms of the decisions, right? I'm sorry I've run out of time. We might have to do something again further. No, I'm not sure. All right, but thank you. You've been a wonderful audience. I know that we have had many. I know that you still probably have a lot of questions. So if the questions have come in, I will try and see how best we can still deal with it for those who are coming in with questions from home. Okay? Thanks and a blessing and good night to you.
Thank you, Father.